Hello, everyone. It's been a while. Welcome to Pucks and Brews. And as always, I have to look up the episode number on the fly because I never remember to look just before we get going. But it's episode number 26 of Pucks and Brews right here, almost number 27, which is one of my favorite numbers. But that's a that's a side note. So today, I am your host, as always, Michael Sparacino, joined once again by Liam Gotimer, or should I say, Liam, the uncrowned Shellmaster Gotimer,
I like that.
as the old nickname we used to give you.
It's crazy that we're reminiscing about the good old days, right, Shades? It was just seemed like just a little while ago I met you, and we started talking hockey together. But yeah, it's great to be back on Pucks and Brews. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And as always, well, not as always, but I figured since it's basically the first episode of the season, I got a large Dunkin' cold brew. Unfortunately, we are not sponsored, so I did have to pay for this, but I needed caffeine, and this always gets the job done. So, got to do it.
I actually have a drink with me this episode, Shades. I got Dr. Pepper, zero sugar. So I don't usually drink while on the episodes, but today's that day.
Funny enough, I don't think I've ever had a Dr. Pepper.
Never. I just found out the other day and it stunned me. And, it probably won't shock you because you've never had Dr. Pepper. But I thought Dr. Pepper was inherently cherry flavored. It's not. It's just a regular old soda. It's like kind of like a subset of root beer. I found that to be very, very odd. If anybody's listening to this has an opinion on Dr. Pepper, let me know. I was today years old when I figured that out, but hey,
Wow,
it's
that's
interesting.
actually,
Little
yeah,
side note.
that is interesting. I honestly, that thought never even crossed my head because you were right. It kind of does give off the cherry-ish vibe just from the name,
That's right, it does.
which is weird because pepper is not even anywhere near cherry flavored.
Right?
Yeah,
You're
that's a new
absolutely
one.
right. Now that I think about it, you're right.
Yeah, that's a
That's
new one.
funny.
That is a fun fact. I'm actually, you learn something new every day.
That's right. I found out on Twitter and I was like, I took a legit double take. I'm like, wait, how am I 24 years old and just found this out? But whatever.
All right, well, that's cool. Shit.
Yeah.
I used to be a major fan of root beer. Then I quit drinking soda outside of ginger ale. So
Okay.
yeah. Anyway, so let's move on to the hockey portion of this. Not gonna lie, you threw me for a loop on that one. I didn't expect us to go there. So let's
That's
start
what
off
post
with,
pro's for.
yeah, seriously. So let's start off with some Rangers news that broke. When was it? Like 2 weeks ago now.
Yeah, we're getting up on 2 weeks. Yep.
Yeah. So the Rangers have traded right-handed right defensive prospect Nils Lundkvist to the Dallas Stars in exchange for a conditional first round pick and a conditional fourth round pick. The condition on the first round pick being specifically the year, depending on whether or not Dallas finishes in the top 10. If they do finish in the top 10 this year, it is a 2024 first round pick. And the condition on the 2025 fourth round pick would be
I think if
if
Lundqvist,
Lundqvist earns
yeah.
55 cumulative points over this season and next season in the regular season, the pick becomes a third in 2025. So, first and foremost, great value for a player who had zero future with the team and only a handful of NHL games under his belt. Liam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was a great trade when it came up. Of course, Nils Lundkvist did not want to report to camp. Like you said, Shades, this is a player that didn't necessarily have a future within the Rangers organization. Zach Jones had already pretty much taken up that last spot on the right side entering training camp, especially
Schneider.
finding out that, excuse me, with Schneider, but especially after Lundqvist said that he wouldn't report, was clear and evident that Drury had to move on. And for a Dallas general manager in Jim Neal, who does not notoriously trade away his first round picks, that was a little bit of a shocker because it's not like they're a contender at the top of the Central that's going to end up, 25 to 30, 31, once the draft, lottery starts and, we figure out where everybody's placed. So to be able to get a mid first round pick and potentially a third round pick out of the deal, that's a slam dunk for Chris Drury. And look, if the first round pick is top 10, then next year that becomes unprotected. And you never know what can happen with those unprotected first round picks. That could be quite a steal
Oh
for
yeah,
the Rangers when it's all said and done.
yeah, there is a literally an extremely slim chance that this could be first overall next in 2024. Now, granted,
And
I'm not banking on that,
mhm.
but just saying, like, the possibility is out there.
Yeah, the possibility is there, and Chris Drury put himself in that position with this trade. And again, what else can you ask for a player that doesn't have a future with the organization? I mean, Nils Lundkvist last year, he came up for a handful of games, scored on the power play against Colorado, and then after that,
Hmm.
pretty much nothing. You know, somebody who's just kind of getting lost in the lights. And hopefully, I hope his career takes off in Dallas, but he didn't have anything here in New York, and that's that. You got to allocate your assets the right way, and Drury did that.
Yeah, the interesting what if question in all of this is if he did have a future with the team, which guy wouldn't be here right now? And also, you could get into the subsections within that of if they never made the Truba trade, if they never made the Fox trade, who would be the three, yada, yada, yada. But that's a whole other conversation that we don't need to delve too far into. But it's an interesting what if.
It is an interesting what if. But again, that's not the reality that we're in. And as far as the third pairing, young defensemen are concerned, I'm perfectly content with Braden Schneider and Zach Jones. And when Nils Lundkvist not being a part of the equation doesn't really affect me one way or the other.
Yeah,
And when we're on draft night and we have the 15th pick, and when we can package, our two first round picks to potentially move up and get an even better player, I'm going to be even happier then than I was when the trade was originally announced. So.
yeah, and when all's said and done, Lundqvist was the 28th pick in the 2018 draft, and the
Yeah.
Rangers are 99.99% going to get a higher pick and probably by a pretty significant margin in the first round.
Yeah, they're progressing through quality and quantity, right? Because you'd rather have a 15th overall pick than a 28th overall pick. And then again, don't throw away that conditional fourth as well. There are plenty of players drafted in the third or fourth round in recent history that have been steals for the teams that have drafted them. And, the Rangers could very well end up with two solid players in exchange for a player that might not even remain with Dallas, for the foreseeable future. So.
Hey, you never know. And just to lastly say, I mean, you could always package your second first round pick in whichever year the pick lands to move up even further.
Yeah.
So, hey, anything's possible.
And Chase, I'll just wrap it up by saying this: it's a deep draft next year. It's deep,
2023.
and yeah, and the 15th overall pick in next year's draft just might be top 10 in last year's draft. So there are a lot of good prospects, and the Rangers should end up with somebody really good. So.
Hey, all I'm saying is Keandre Miller and Braden Schneider, more so Miller, is looking like a significant steal already. And this is going back drafting 4 years ago.
Yep.
So,
You got to thank Jeff Gordon for that.
yeah. But in the end, this was a very good trade by Chris Drury.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It was a solid trade. Again.
All right, so let's get to the meat of the episode here.
Shades, real quick.
Oh,
Sorry,
hit
I
me.
just wanted to add something. Just came to my mind. Chris Drury took a disgruntled player in Nils Lundkvist and traded him and got two really solid pieces. If push comes to shove and Vitaly Kravtsov forces his way off this team and doesn't make the opening night roster, like I'm predicting that he won't, Drury is not going to settle for anything less than what he got for Lundkvist. So this sets my mind at ease and should set other Rangers fans' mind at ease when they say that they might not get enough for Kravtsov. I think this trade shows you that Drury is not going to get fleeced for any of his young players that don't want to be here. Just wanted to put that out there.
Actually, you know what? That's an interesting point because look at Kravtsov was the 9th overall pick. Lundqvist was the 28th. Lias Anderson was the 7th, and Jeff Gordon had to settle. Well, I mean, we look back at it now, or at the time, we were looking at it and saying he had to settle for a late second round pick. In hindsight, that was actually very good value for where Anderson's at now. So it also depends player to player. Lundkvist was still a very highly touted prospect across the league, even though him and Kravtsov were drafted in the same year. Every GM views each prospect differently, so you never know. If we can get a first round pick for a guy who hasn't shown much on North American, I was gonna say soil for some reason, but North American ice. Don't ask me why that word popped into my head there, but for a guy who hasn't shown much productivity on North American ice, I would be shocked if he gets as high value as he does for Lundkvist.
Well, I mean, that's where I slightly disagree. I will agree in this sense. Right shot defensemen are so hard to come by. And when you couple the prospect status of Nils Lundkvist and the fact that he's a right shot defenseman, I can understand why more value is set for him on the trade market rather than for Kravtsov. But I think you just said it. He's the ninth overall pick. This is a talented player. This is somebody who performed very well in the KHL. And if you compare his stats in the KHL to some of the other players who have come through there and entered into the NHL, he's in good company, alongside Nikita Kucherov, Evgeny Kuznetsov, so on and so forth. So I think he's going to have his chance playing with Artemi Panarin, but I don't think that Drury's going to wait all that long to pull the plug, because if he waits as long as Gorton did with Lias Anderson, then your return might shift from a first round pick to the 60th overall pick, which is what Gordon eventually got for Lias Anderson. And fun fact, Lias
Will
Anderson
Cooley
was put on waivers the other day. Yeah, and that turned into Will Cooley. That's right. So
who actually looks like a legitimate bottom six forward in the future.
He does. Absolutely.
Yeah,
right
and what were you going to say about you were just saying his name already escaped me.
No, sorry, I lost my train of thought myself. But Lias Anderson got waived earlier this week by the Los Angeles Kings, so he is no longer on the roster. And again, that's just got the 60th overall pick for a player that was shuffling between the AHL, Ontario, and the Kings organization. So.
Yeah, and to put a bow on this conversation, Mark Messier got traded for a fourth round pick back in the day, if I remember correctly, and that draft pick literally turned into Ryan Callahan. So you never know. You just never know. But in the end, I hope that whatever happens with this pick, whether we use the pick, we trade back, trade up, whatever the fact, I hope that it ends up working out, because if it doesn't, this is going to be a polarizing trade if it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think Chris Drury, took advantage of Jim Nill, right? Because John Klingberg, of course, no longer with the organization, now with the Anaheim Ducks, and there was, a spot to fill on that blue line for Dallas. And, I'm not going to say that Jim Nill necessarily made, an impulsive decision, but Drury took advantage of another team's area of necessity and really got back prime value again for Lundkvist. But again, we could put a bow on the conversation. But I think both of us, we just concur in the fact that Drury knocked this one out of the ballpark. As I watch the Indians and the Guardians and the Rays go to the 15th inning in playoff baseball, 0-0 in the 15th inning right now. So
Jeez.
That's that. There's your little baseball snippet of Pucks Brews.
Yeah, and to finally close the book on this conversation, you know what? I do have a bunch of books here, because let's just to finally close the book on this conversation. Drury, I swear to God, I really hope that this trade works out and brings the Rangers or at least helps to bring the Rangers a cup in the future.
Same with me.
All right, now let's get to the meat of the episode. Liam, once again, the regular season is right around the corner. Technically, it's already started because there's been 2 games played over in Europe between the Predators and the Sharks. And at the time of recording, the Predators and Sharks game, the second one, ended probably roughly 10 minutes ago. Predators are 2-0, first in the league, but I don't think that's going to stand. So let's get right into it. We're going to start over in the West and the Central, and we're going to go based on the order of which teams finished last year, 1 through 8, or actually, not or, because Seattle's the 32nd team now. I got so used to there being 30 and 31 teams. So let's start off with
Right.
Colorado, the reigning and defending Stanley Cup champions. I still can't believe Jack Johnson is a Stanley Cup champion. I'm still shell shocked about that. But let's look at a couple things that happened. They did lose Darcy Kemper and they got Alexander Georgiev. In my opinion, that's a downgrade. They did lose Nazem Kadri, which I think that's going to be, it's a big loss, but it's not like a catastrophic loss because they have a very well built oiled machine over there. At the end of the day, excuse me, at the end of the day, I still see them running away with this division. What are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, for Colorado, again, I'm with you. I think they definitely downgraded going from Kemper to Georgiev. And if you watch the first couple of opportunities that Georgiev had in the preseason, he was not impressive. I think his save percentage was sub 700. So
Ooh.
that worries me. Certainly no Kadri either. I don't know how, their top six is necessarily going to gel, because you want to keep your top six and, your top four defensemen pretty much intact after winning a Stanley Cup. And they didn't do that. And they didn't keep their goaltending intact. And you're kind of, messing with two backups now in Pavel Francouz and Alexander Georgiev. It's definitely a risk. And Shades, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say that defending Stanley Cup champions don't win the Central Division. I have a different team winning the Central. I can get to that right now, or I can get to it a little bit later, but up to you.
I just want to, before we get to that, I forgot that they also lost Andre Burakovsky to Seattle, if I remember correctly. He
They
was a
did.
guy that was on
They
that
did.
team
Yeah.
for a couple years that actually had very good productivity. So it's amazing. They're a weird one because they seemingly had a crap ton of cap space, and then after the fact, it just looked like they didn't really have anywhere near as much as it once seemed.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, so hey, that's NHL salary cap. But side note, the salary cap did go up another million. So now is it at 82 and a half or 83 and a half?
I believe it's at 83 and a half, but I could be wrong on that.
I
But
don't know why I just asked you that. I literally have cap friendly open. God, Jesus Christ, Mike, use your fucking
you're
brain.
asking the guy who's on his
Yeah,
phone. I mean,
use your fucking brain, Mike. It's 82 and a half.
82 and a half. Okay, I got
Okay.
you.
Jesus Christ. Dude, I'm telling you,
But
I
Shades,
told you I was tired before
yeah,
we started recording
yeah.
this.
Full disclosure, everybody, Shades did tell me that. But real quick, who do you think I have winning the Central? So if it's not Colorado, who do you think I win in the Central?
Well, it's between literally two teams. It's between either the Wild, who we're going to talk about next, or the Blues, because those are literally the only two options. Uh, in my personal opinion, I think the Blues are your choice because the Wild have so much in dead cap space. So
Yes,
let's talk about
The Blues are my choice. Yes,
okay.
but we'll
I'm
talk
actually
about the Wild.
yeah, we'll talk about the Wild first. So the Wild, when I was going through this, like before I started making notes and stuff, and I looked at the standings from last season, literally I was shocked because I forgot just how well the Wild did last year. I was fully ready to go, man, I think I have a hot take of the Wild missing the playoffs, and then I'm just like, then I looked at the standings from last season and went, oh shit, that's right, they did do that good last year. And they still have a pretty much their entire team intact from last year. So I do have them making the playoffs this year. And but I do have them slipping to number 3 and not number 2 this year. Because they look at
Yeah,
their yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say for me, I have them slipping too. I have them as a wild card team. I don't have them in the top three in the Central. I have St. Louis number one. I have Colorado number two. And my third team in the Central, everybody's sleeping on them. But you know
Nashville.
what? They re-signed their top goal scorer in Philip Forsberg. You have a Vezina candidate every year in UC Saros. Oh, and you have a guy Roman Yossi who puts up 100 points from the back end and is a number one defenseman. consistent Norris Trophy candidates. So I can't take anything away from Nashville. And I just think Minnesota, I mean, they traded away Kevin Fiala. That really turned me off, trading away Kevin Fiala to the Los Angeles Kings. He was their dynamo. He was their engine. And now you're going to back up a 37-year-old Marc-Andre Fleury after trading away Cam Talbot, to go and get you into the playoffs. I mean, I think they'll make the postseason, but I think in the Central, they're going to have a little bit of a rough time. I really do. And I don't think that's a hot take. And too much dead cap space, too, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Ryan Hartman's 38 goal season or whatever it was a season ago was an anomaly. I think he could put up 20 again, but I don't see him putting up that much. This team is really going to go as far as Fleury and Kaprizov take them.
That's right. And I don't think Fleury is going to be able to take them to second or third in the Central, never mind the Central Division title. I just think he's a little bit over the hill at this point. I think last year just kind of showed us when he was unable to take the reins away from Cam Talbot, come to playoffs, and there was still a question on who they were going to start. That's kind of when I was like, I don't know how much faith the Wild organization have in him. Of course, they go on to trade Talbot and re-sign Fleury, but I just don't know how somebody who is aging like that is going to help you win a Stanley Cup at this point. I just don't.
I agree. So you got them finishing in a wild card, so fourth, and
I do.
You got the Blues 1, and now we basically touched on the Blues. You have them winning the division. I have them finishing second because I have Nashville finishing third. We'll get to Nashville in a second. But
okay.
for me, St. Louis, I mean, like they still kind of have the same team from when they won the cup. They did lose a couple pieces. I mean, they lost Perron, who was really good get for them. Well, he was a really good player for them for a long time. Binnington, I mean, he's kind of a wild card to me, but the Blues just have such a solid team, both on defense and up front, that I can't see them slipping to a wild card spot.
Absolutely, Shades. And there's one stat that I love to tell people when putting praise on the St. Louis Blues name, and it's this. There are only two teams in the Stanley Cup playoffs to beat the Colorado Avalanche. One was the Tampa Bay Lightning, and the other was the St. Louis Blues, and they both did it 2 times. If that doesn't tell you where they stand, I don't know what does. They are a very solid, well put together team, and yeah, they lost Willie Husso, and yeah, Jordan Binnington is a wild card, but I think they'll be able to pull it out. I'm more confident at this point in the St. Louis Blues goaltending than I am in the Avs goaltending, and that is why I have them winning the division over Colorado.
It's a solid point. So we'll get
that's
to
saying something. That I have more faith in Binnington than I do Georgiev. That's saying something. But
yeah, that's you know my thoughts on Georgiev. I won't get into that again until later. So we move on to the team that finished fourth last year, the Dallas Stars. Personally, I have them slipping out of a playoff spot because I think they overachieved last year. As much as I love Jason Robertson, who I actually, thank God I picked him in fantasy when I did last year, as a side note, but they do have that. They do have some really good defensemen, and because Heiskanen and Lindell, especially Suter at a 3.6 mil cap hit, is still, you're getting your bang for your buck there with him because he's still solid. The main question going to be with them is, can Ottinger perform at that high level when their offense is still subpar goal scoring wise?
Yeah, Shades.
And I'm also sorry because there was a truck that was making a shit ton of noise. I'm sorry if that came across.
Didn't come across on my end, but I was just going to address the offense. The offense took a significant tumble from, of course, the year that they went to the Stanley Cup final against the Lightning in the bubble. I mean, Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin just look like shadows of their former selves. And if it wasn't for young guys like Rope Hintz and Jason Robertson that, put in that youth a little bit and bring that energy, I think that they would be, back towards the bottom of the Central. But like you said, they still have a very good defensive core. I like Lundkvist. I like Suter, Lindell as well. And of course, Heiskanen, like you mentioned. I think Ottinger's good, but I think a lot of people are, putting a lot of pressure on Jake Ottinger based off of what he did in the round 1 series against Calgary last year. If you look at his regular season,
yeah, you have to temper
a little
expectations.
bit pedestrian. Exactly. So
because you got to remember, he's only 23 right now.
That's right. And I will wrap it up talking about Dallas with this. The Dallas Stars will only go as far as Jake Ottinger will take them, and that's that.
And that is going to be to fifth place in the Central for me outside of the playoffs.
I have them in the same spot.
Okay, and like moving on to the Predators, fifth, I have them jumping the Stars and getting a wild card spot in the Central because, like you said earlier, they re-signed Philip Forsberg. They have literally a Vezina caliber goalie, UC Saros in net. Their Roman Yossi literally was a Norris finalist last year, and he's only 32, so he still has a very high level of hockey left in him for at least 2 more years. They added Ryan McDonough for nothing. Ekholm is still solid. A rising young defenseman in Dante Fabro. And don't forget, they have Jeremy Lauzon. I liked their defense core before the McDonough trade. Now the question is going to become for them, can their offense keep it up? Can Duchesne keep his head on right? Can Johansson produce enough? Can Granlund produce at a higher clip? Niederreiter was a good pickup for them. And can some of the young guys like Trennan and Tolvanen and Tomasino, and especially Janot too, can they take steps forward? That's going to be the real key for them.
Yeah, Shade, you took the words right out of my mouth. Again, I was going to say that the Predators go as far as their young guys take them. Tanner Janot is the wild card for me. I mean, he was so good last year in his rookie season. And look, the Preds, they have the defense, they have the goaltending, they have the system to make it work. Can they score enough goals? So it's going to be on the young guys, and it's going to be on the two veterans, Ryan Johansson and Matt Duchesne, two players who had nice bounce back years. If they can just just find their stride and, just be a nice compliment to the young guys, I think Nashville they can get as far as second place in the Central, in my opinion. They're really good, and they're slept on by a lot of fans around the NHL. So personally, I'm glad you're not one of them,
No, their offense or their team took a tumble in like the second half of the season, and the only reason they made the playoffs last year with how they were playing was pretty much because of how injured Vegas got.
Right.
So,
yeah, spot on.
but I think that their second half of the season or whatever the span was kind of an anomaly. But I think they're going to bounce back and be better this year and finish fourth in the Central. So, real quick, to touch on the Jets, yes, they still have Blake Wheeler, Scheifele, Connor, Ehlers, which, in my opinion, I would fucking love if those four guys were in my top six. But their second center spot is still a major question mark. That dressing room is just awful.
I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a microphone issue. My AirPods died. You're talking about Winnipeg, correct?
Yeah.
I heard bad locker room, and I was like, okay, you can only be talking about one team, and that's the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, hey, look, Shades, Paul Maurice left in the middle of the year last year.
He did it for a reason.
And that was very suspect. Pierre-Luc Dubois is not he's not a model teammate, I guess you could say. Mark Scheifele, there's certainly questions about how much of a leader he is. They stripped the captaincy away from Blake Wheeler. I mean, it's a tumultuous environment in Winnipeg, like that.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Like I said, Hellebuck is good, but I can't see him carrying the Jets above sixth place in the Central this year.
Yeah, neither can I, unfortunately. I think sixth, seventh in the Central, I think is about right as to where they end up. You can't really. It's really tough for teams to work past a bad locker room environment, and Winnipeg has not been able to do that the last couple of years, despite having a pretty solid roster. I mean, they were pretty well put together. Going back even 3-4 years ago, and I predicted them to make the playoffs last year, and again, they didn't even get close to that mark. So.
Yeah, and that's really all that needs to be said about Winnipeg. So they finished sixth last year. I got them sixth again, and you have them 6/7. And then we have the Blackhawks and the Coyotes. This is all that needs to be said about the Blackhawks. They're in full on tear it down, start from the beginning, just burn it all down, which is exactly why I'm going to make a bold prediction here and say that they finish eighth.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. They finished last in the Central.
Yes.
Yeah, it's tough for me. I can't believe I'm sitting here right now and I have to distinguish which team is worse, the Arizona Coyotes or the Chicago Blackhawks. I mean, and the Blackhawks still have Patty Kane and Jonathan Toews and Seth Jones on the roster. Um, yeah, I mean, I think Chicago's going to end up seventh. I just think Arizona is just that bad. But again, it wouldn't surprise me. You can really flip flop them, but if I had a gun to my head, I would take Chicago seven, Arizona eight, Winnipeg six.
And yeah, just to put a bow on the Central Division, like you said, you think the Blackhawks are going to finish seventh, and I think they're going to finish last. I'm saying that just to do a mini hot take, just because I mean, arguing over which team is going to finish last in a division is kind of arguing which player you would rather take in like the last pick of the seventh round of the draft or something. It's kind of pointless. So I'm saying this to be like 1% controversial.
Gotcha. I don't think it's all that controversial, to be honest with you. I could see the Blackhawks reaching a point in the season to where they just trade away every single expiring contract they have. And it's just like, if I have to take a little bit less on Patty Kane to trade him, I will. But,
Yeah, and plus the
they want
Blackhawks also
Bedard.
lost.
They want Bedard. That's
Yeah,
just it.
and plus the Blackhawks also traded away DeBrincat, and that was a huge blow.
Right on. I agree with
And
you.
then, well, last but not least, the Coyotes are the Coyotes. Do we really have to go in depth at all with this one?
They're playing at Arizona State University, folks. That's all we got to tell you.
And I still think that they're going to finish ahead of the Blackhawks. Why? Because I just feel like saying that. That's why. Nothing ever goes according to plan in these predictions. So I'm just gonna do this just because.
And I have them finishing after the Blackhawks. Why? Well,
because it's the Coyotes.
Because that's the Coyotes, and that's my opinion, and that's that.
Yeah, and that's the Central Division.
That's right.
So let's move on to the Pacific Division, where things are going to get very interesting over the course of the season. So the Flames finished first last year. They lost Johnny Gaudreau in free agency. They traded away Matthew Tkachuk. That alone sounds terrible. But then you factor in the return they got for Tkachuk was Jonathan freaking Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar on top of 2 draft picks, if I remember correctly. So first off, they cleaned the hell up in that trade. And late into free agency, they signed Nazem Kadri. That is extremely good damage control, if you could even call it that at that point. I mean, that was kind of like a lateral movement. That was like the greatest lateral movement of all time. What are your thoughts on that?
Done. Yeah, well done by Brad Treliving. And you know what? I'll just add on top of what you're saying. Huberdeau was signed to an extension. Weegar today was signed to an extension as well. So both of those players are sticking around in Calgary for the long term. And, the public sentiment after Brad Treliving brought those 2 players in was that that's great. Huberdeau's great. Mackenzie Weegar is a young up-and-coming defenseman. Okay. But Gaudreau didn't want to stay in Calgary. Tkachuk didn't want to stay in Calgary. What makes you think these guys are going to want to stay? Well, that has just been thrown completely out the window. Weegar wants to stay. Huberdeau wants to stay. And there's also one other person who wants to stay, and that's Daryl Sutter. And as long as you have all 3 of those in their respective positions doing what they do, I think the Flames will be just fine. Now I will lock them in for a playoff spot. I'm not going to say that they're going to win the Pacific, but I think that they'll be in the top 3. I'm going to put them at second.
Interesting. I actually
around that. And I have a very team at number 1, so we'll get to that.
I have a feeling I know who you have at number 1, but I'm actually going to put them remaining at the number 1 spot because I like their defense probably the most in this entire division. And looking at, I do like their defense out of everyone in this division because Hannafin's good. Rasmus Anderson's very good. They just got Weegar. Kylington or Shillington, whichever one you feel like calling him. I always find that fascinating because they seemingly switch it from game to game. And Valimaki is a 24-year-old who's still developing. Markstrom is very good in net. And like we said, Huberdeau and Kadri, they still have Andrew Mangiapane, who is very good. Elias Lindholm, very good. Dylan Dubé, very good for a middle six forward. I mean, they just a solid team, and I'm pretty sure, like you said, Sutter's sticking around. I'm 99% sure I got a notification earlier that he signed an extension. So
Yep.
this is still a very good team, and this is just my opinion. I think they're going to finish first again because of the phenomenal damage control that they did.
And Shades, I can absolutely see them finishing first, without a doubt. I just like to be a little risky with my preseason. But again, that's risky too, because at the time of the Kachuk trade, if you were to have come out and said that the Flames were going to win the division, I think some hockey fans will be looking at you like you had two heads. So, look, I like the pick. I like Calgary. They're a complete team. You also didn't mention Chris Tanev as well
Oh
on the
yeah.
back end. He's a top four defenseman. So, I mean, yeah, they got a really solid team. I like Markstrom as well. A lot of people forget that he was a Vezina candidate too. Didn't have the greatest playoffs, but during the regular season, he was really solid back there. So I definitely think that they will be second or third, but I'll go second. And I won't be surprised if they finish first. I really won't.
All right, so you got them second, I got them first. Let's move on to the team that finished second last year, who, spoiler alert, I have them finishing second in the division again, the Edmonton
Yeah.
Oilers. I was actually listening to Steve Dangle's podcast, and he brought up a very interesting point. McDavid is, what did he say, 26 or 25?
I believe he's 24. Might be
20.
25.
Oh, dear Lord. No, he's 25.
He's 25.
He
Okay.
did bring up a very interesting point that I actually happen to agree with. He said, typically for hockey players and in general of athletes in general themselves, 25 going on 26, that's when you're legitimately hitting your prime. And Draisaitl is only a year older. I have a feeling that McDavid can play even better than he did last season. And believe it or not, they actually do have a solid top 6 to top 9 forward group, because Nuge is actually a pretty good player. Hyman was a phenomenal acquisition for that team. In my personal opinion, their defense isn't the greatest, but they have some young, solid pieces uprising. I mean, Barry is Barry, CC is CC. I mean, those are kind of just like middle of the road guys. Darnell Nurse, I mean, personally, I'm not a huge fan of his, but I think if Jack Campbell stays healthy, I think this team can do some damage in the regular season, which is exactly why I have them finishing second again.
Yeah, I like Edmonton a lot too. And, again, the one thing I've said about Edmonton for years now is that they got to get themselves a goaltender. Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen is not going to cut it. And hey, credit to Ken Holland. He went out there and, he brought in Jack Campbell, who had a very good year in Toronto last season, a very good year in Toronto last season, 1 year. So I'm not going to say that he's going to come in and be the savior that this team needs. They're still going to make the playoffs. I have them pinpointed at third in the division right now. Yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at with them. I just look, who's a better team, the Maple Leafs with Jack Campbell last year or the Oilers with Jack Campbell this year? And I think it's the Leafs. And I don't really think, it's particularly close. So I think everyone should just pump the brakes on the Oilers a little bit, unless McDavid and Draisaitl just go into absolute beast super god mode come the season. And they have I'm talking like 160 to 180 point season, around something like that. I just don't see them taking that major step forward to bring them from where they were last year, where they ended up last year, to where they want to be. If they were to meet Colorado again in the Western Conference Final, is it really going to be anything of a different story? I can't really sit here with the roster they have and say it would be. But again, that could totally backfire in my face. But I still have them making the playoffs, and I'm going to have them at third behind Calgary. And I think it'll be close, 2-3, very close.
Okay, that's actually pretty interesting. So you have them third, I have them second, and you had the Flames second.
That's right.
So let's move on to the LA Kings, which this is a very interesting team going into this season, because they have a lot of young high-end players. And they're going into the last year of Jonathan Quick's contract with Cal Peterson as his backup, who is still, there's a very small percentage that he's unproven. There's like very snippet. The exact word I'm trying to look for is escaping me. But he's not an all the way proven NHL starter yet, and he has 2 years after this, also at $5 million, which could potentially come back to bite them in the ass. Time will tell. But I mean, hey, they did get Kevin Fiala this season. Philip Deneau played extremely well last season. They have literally Quentin Byfield behind Anze Kopitar and Deneau, with some good guys like Alex Iafallo and Adrian Kempe, along with Victor Arvidsson. And the only thing that really gets me about this team, or I'm not all the way in on this team. I mean, Doughty's good, but he's not the same defenseman that he was. And the rest of their decor is kind of just okay.
Yeah, Shades, that's what gets me about the Kings is their defensive core and their goaltending. I think I'll, combine the two of them together. I think Drew Doughty's still very good. I still think he's very much a capable number one defenseman. But after that, you look at Sean Dursey, Brant Clark, on the back end as well, Michael Anderson, Sean Walker, Matt Roy. These are just unproven guys, and I'm just not sure how well they're going to mold into the top six. And when push comes to shove, come playoff time, are they going to fold under the pressure? Are they going to be able to keep themselves above water in this really difficult Pacific Division? But then I look at the young guys, and I look at Kopitar, and I look at Quentin Byfield and how much of a mentor he could potentially be, to the number 3 overall pick of a couple of years ago. I look at Alex Turcotte, who hasn't really come into his own. I look at Gabe Velarde, who they're still looking to get a little bit more out of. Arthur Kaliev was drafted in the second round. He can, rifle the puck with the best of them. Victor Arvidsson, I think a lot of people forget Arvidsson is a king now. Philip Deneau is one of the best two-way centers in the league. I didn't even mention Kevin Fiala, who I absolutely gloated about when I was talking about the Minnesota Wild. Shades, I know it sounds ballsy to say this.
I had a feeling this was going to be your first team.
But I'm going to take the Kings to win the Pacific. And I know it's wild, but I'm going to take the Kings to win the Pacific, and I'm not going to go back on it. I just think when you have the influx of youth and veteran talent that they do, and you have a division in the Pacific that's just a little bit topsy-turvy for me, there's not that clear-cut number one. I don't have that faith in Edmonton. I like what Calgary did on paper, but there's been a lot of teams in the last few years I've loved what they've done on paper, and then they go and shit the bed in the regular season. And I see this Kings team as a team that performed really well last year and just needed a little bit more time to get themselves in better playoff position, and maybe they would have gone farther than they did. And I see this as a real prime opportunity for them to take this division in a year where positions are not necessarily solidified at this point. But that could backfire so far on me, but I'm going to go a little bit bold. That's my boldest prediction for who's going to win a division, but I'm going to take the Kings.
Yeah, like you said, this team is going to go as far as the young players take them, assuming the veterans hold up like they did and played well like they did last year. Specifically, Kopitar, Deneau, and Doughty. So you have them finishing first. I have them as a wild card team.
Okay.
Which might be
that's fair.
That might be a little harsh, but like we both said, there's a lot of unproven players there.
There are.
Yeah. Now, moving on to the team that finished 4th last year, the Vegas Golden Knights. This is a team that was pretty much destroyed by injuries last year. And I mean destroyed by injuries last year, which is probably the only reason that they missed the playoffs to begin with, because Eichel was out pretty much most of the season. Stone was out for a long time. Pietrangelo, if I remember correctly, he was out for a while. I'm pretty sure Martinez missed time. Shea Theodore, I don't remember if he missed time or not, but I'm pretty sure he was the only one that was like fully healthy last season, if I remember correctly. And didn't Smith and Marchessault also miss a couple games here and there? They were injured to shit last year.
Yeah, no, they definitely they went through a lot of injury trouble last season, but that's not really going to change where I necessarily have them positioned. have them fourth. I had them fourth last year, fourth this year. I don't really. I mean, hey, I'm saying this as I work for Vegas, I work for the organization. But I don't really like how they kind of run things. I don't like what they did with Marc-Andre Fleury.
Mm.
I don't like the trade of Max Pacioretty, how you just traded him to Carolina for nothing. Also gave away one of your best young defensemen in Chris Coughlin to Carolina for absolutely nothing. It's just poor asset management. And yes, they have Jack Eichel, but he's also a little bit of a wild card. I don't know how healthy that neck is. He looked good towards the end of last year. He was looking, a little bit like the Jack Eichel that we remember from Buffalo, but it's a tough injury, to kind of perfect and make your way 100% of the way back from. And I'm just not sure if Eichel has the ability to do that. And I don't know if Phil Kessel replacing Max Pacioretty in your top six is going to help you place better than you did last year. And you lost some defensive depth on the blue line. There is no Robin Leonard this year, so it's just Logan Thompson. I don't know. There's questions on the back end. There's questions with the goaltending. There's questions in the top six. I like Bruce Cassidy coming in and taking over the head coaching duties, but that's about it as far as what I like about what the Golden Knights have done this offseason. So they'll make the playoffs, but I don't have them placing in the division top three.
Now, I do have the Golden Knights as the fourth seed and a wild card spot, and here's why. There was, amidst all the injuries, which is where the main focus went with this team last year, Robin Leonard did not have a good season last year.
He didn't.
Which is that's arguably more of a factor of why they missed the playoffs down the stretch, because his I don't have his exact save percentage up, but it was not good. I'm actually going to look this up right now. His save percentage total overall last season was a 907.
Yeah, that's rough.
Now, granted, that was probably dragged down by the second half of the season where he had like an 8 something. But you have Logan Thompson and Laurent Brossoit along with Adin Hill. Now, Adin Hill, I mean, he's a proven backup. Well, he's proven that he's not a starter, that is a shoe in for a backup spot. Logan Thompson was an interesting one last year because I remember I picked him up in fantasy towards the tail end of last season, and he was actually not bad. So if he can maintain probably a 9-10 save percentage, along with Brossoit, who's most likely going to be the backup, I can see this team making the playoffs just off of average goaltending if they stay healthy.
As can I, but that's a major if they can stay healthy.
And well, here's the thing. I thought with all the injuries last year, I thought that was an anomaly with just how injured they were.
That's fair enough. That's fair. I mean, we're gonna see what this true Golden Knights roster is really made of, and if all these stark decisions that this upper management group has made is going to pay off. And I just can't sit here and say that it's going to pay off right now if we're doing our prediction episode. But again, Logan Thompson I like a lot. Don't get me wrong, and I like Laurent Brossoit as well. And if they can stay healthy, they definitely have a chance. And I will instill that confidence and say that they'll place fourth, like where you have them, and then they'll make the wild card.
I actually made a mistake. I actually have them third. I had the Kings fourth.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to correct myself there. So yeah, like I said, I see them on them staying healthy. Is that even considered bouncing back?
I guess not. Right.
I honestly, I think, like I said, I thought last year was an anomaly with the amount of injuries. So you have them fourth. I have them third. Let's move on to the Canucks. Now, I've been hearing all offseason how this team is being slept on. This team is being slept on. And I kind of fell into that hype for a little bit, but then I realized I wouldn't put them above the Flames for obvious reasons. I wouldn't put them above the Oilers because the Oilers finished with 9 more wins than they did. The Kings, like we said, are going to be a very interesting team. The Knights, I think, are going to make the playoffs just because last year, like we said, with all the injuries, was an anomaly. And people are saying all offseason, people are sleeping on the Canucks. They might make the playoffs. They might. Granted, I have them as the first team out of the playoffs I have them just missing the second wild card spot because the team didn't really change much from last season, in my opinion.
Yeah, they brought in Ilya Mikheyev, right, from Toronto, a big 4-year free agent contract. But that's about it. They traded away Jason Dickinson yesterday, added a second round pick to it just to get his cap off the books. Um, yeah, again, the team hasn't really changed much. I will give you that. But with that said, I think people are sleeping on the Canucks. I think if you're talking about bad years that might have been an anomaly, I think last year for Vancouver was an anomaly. I think after Bruce Boudreau took over behind the bench, you saw a real change in this team. And if you remember correctly, if I remember correctly, rather, time just ran out on the Canucks for them to make the playoffs. I feel like if they had an extra 7 to 10 games in the season, I feel like they could have snuck themselves into one of those wild card spots and they could have made a run and we could, be having an entirely different conversation about them right now. Remember, they're 2 years removed from being in the Western Conference semifinals in the bubble, right? When they beat Vegas, right? And then we're going way back now. And then they lost to Vegas, excuse me. But again, my point is Vancouver is a team that's not too far away. I think that they are actually going to take that second wild card spot.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, I am looking up the 2020 Stanley Cup playoff bracket. They
They beat the
lost.
Wild in the opening round.
Oh, that's wow. I forgot they did the reseeding. I forgot about that.
Yeah, they did the
So
reseeding. Yep.
they beat St. Louis in the first round 2 years ago and then lost to Vegas in seven.
Right. That was
Yeah,
when Demko went absolutely batshit crazy
yeah, and then
and Vegas couldn't score.
yeah, and then we fucking had Dallas in the fucking final. What a waste.
Yeah, what a waste. What a
Yeah, but
waste.
yeah. But hey, don't get me wrong. Vancouver has some nice pieces. I'm not a huge fan of their defense core. Love Quinn Hughes. I think Ekman Larson is overrated. Myers is a decent defenseman, and Dermott is a decent defenseman. Other than that, I mean, there's not much there on
Yeah,
defense.
no.
And outside of their top six forward group, I guess you have Podkolzin,
That's
Tanner
it.
Pearson, but I mean, there's not too much there compared to the other teams ahead of them in the division, which is exactly why I have them finishing fifth again. But
Okay.
but I could see them being a team to make the playoffs because nothing ever goes right in my predictions. I could see them literally as the one team that is going to make the playoffs out of the teams that I don't have making the playoffs.
I gotcha.
All right. Moving on. Come on, computer stop. All right. San Jose Sharks. I love how this is a completely different conversation. The top five teams compared to the bottom three teams, even though it's just like, I don't know what the hell the Sharks are. I really don't know what they are. I mean, they still have a bunch of good players. They still have Couture. They still have Meyer. They have Hurdle. Who the fuck is their goalies again?
Reimer?
Capo Kakinen and James
Reimer and
Reimer.
Kakinen?
That's not
Yeah.
terrible. They still have
Yeah, I
Eric
like
Carlson.
Kakinen.
I mean, Eric Carlson, he's not what he once was, but he's still okay. He's still decent, at least offensively. Kevin LeBanc is still there. I mean, jeez. Yeah, and this team is not headed to the playoffs. I can tell you that for sure. But the only problem with this team is, are they going to get good goaltending and not finish near the basement of the league? That's pretty much the only question I have about this team. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're headed towards the basement of the league. And, you talk about a team that's an anomaly, right? I think the Sharks definitely fit that bill. I mean, there is talent on this team. You have Eric Carlson, who's still pretty good, but he's making $11.5 million. So he's not $11.5 million good. You have Logan Couture, who's still a number one center. You have William Eklund, who was drafted very high up in his draft year just a couple of years back. He's a big time prospect. So I think it's just about developing the rookies, trying not to finish in the basement of the league. But if you talk about a team that could finish last, win the draft lottery, draft Connor Bedard, and have a nice turnaround in the next couple of years, San Jose could be that team. Just one of those teams that's close, needs a generational talent to turn things around, and could just be bad enough, in order to get some luck on their side and bring in Bedard. But again, that's kind of where they're at. Their goaltending is a question mark. I like Kakkonen. I liked him very much in Minnesota. I thought it was a little bit of an interesting deal for Minnesota to trade away their goaltending depth that they didn't have a lot of to San Jose. I believe they got Jacob Middleton back in that deal, a defenseman. Yeah, Reimer, again, a veteran. They're going to be out of the playoffs come the trade deadline, so there's going to certainly be some pieces that they can trade off. And that's just kind of where I'm at with them, just mediocre, and they just need a shot of life in the arm, and the draft lottery could provide that.
This is true. Let's. You know what? I'm gonna put them seventh.
You put them seventh.
Yeah, I'm gonna put them seventh.
That's interesting. I'm gonna put them seventh. No, so it comes down to Seattle or San Jose. I think San Jose is gonna be worse, so I'm gonna put them eighth because I have Anaheim finishing sixth. I really like what Anaheim's done. So spoiler.
Same. I also have them finishing sixth, and let's go into why. Decent. I mean, they have honestly a number of young, skilled forwards. I mean, Zegras is one of them. Troy Terry, Max Jones,
Yep.
Mason McTavish is only 19.
Yep.
I don't see him hitting his stride just yet, but they have a very interesting top four defense: Klingberg, Fowler, Shattenkirk, and Dmitry Kulikov. They also have Jamie Drysdale, the young 20-year-old prospect who was drafted 6th overall 2 years ago.
That's right, he was.
Yeah, the only
Your memory served you well.
Yeah, once in a while. So my only problem with them is, I mean, outside of the young talent, and I mean, the top four defense isn't great. I wouldn't put them in a top 10 conversation or anything, but I mean, they do have guys like Comtois and Lundstrom along with those guys. I mean, they signed Vetrano and Strome. I actually really like the Vetrano signing for them. I mean, there's just not much there, though. And especially the goaltending. 3 years ago, give me John Gibson on my fantasy team any day of the week. He's not the same goalie. Now, granted, this could be because Anaheim fell off a cliff, but I mean, he's finished with a 9-0, a low 9-0 the last 3 years. I mean,
Gibson, yes.
And the problem here's Gibson's career the last 3 years. Great in the first half of the season, bad in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of inflates their place where they finish in the division, which is why I have them finishing sixth again.
Right. It almost seems that, when they drop out of the playoff race, Gibson's, statistics tend to fall along with that.
Yep.
Right. It tends to team. And again, I love John Gibson too. Again, you took the words right out of my mouth. Going back 3 years ago, I'd be very hard pressed to find a few goaltenders that I would take over John Gibson in the NHL. I like Strome. I think Strome's gonna, bring a lot from what he did in New York. I think he can be a top 6, player for them. I like Vetrano as well. He can provide much of the same. Remember, they don't have Sonny Milano anymore, who is still somehow on the free agent market. Got released from his PTO last week. But yeah, brought in an influx of veterans. Jamie Drysdale on the back end. I really like the addition of Klingberg. I think that they could make things interesting in the wild card, but that's about as far as I have them going, making things but missing out on the playoffs. Maybe next year, though, when we're having this conversation, they could definitely be in play for a top 3 spot in the Pacific.
Yeah, and also with them, it depends where they are at the trade deadline and which direction they choose to go.
Exactly. And then that's a lot of question marks for them, come the trade deadline. A lot going to depend on where they're at.
Yep. And let's move on to the Seattle Kraken. Granted, they finished 8th in the Pacific last year, and I have them finishing 8th again because, I mean, one, I look at their goalie tandem right now, and yikes. Dreger, he's injured Martin Jones is not a quality goaltender. Grubauer proved that he was not a true number one this past season. While they did add guys like Andre Burakovsky and Oliver Bjorkstrand, who I actually, those are two players that if they were going to a championship winning team, I'd be like, very good moves. But it's Seattle. Like they're still they're literally in year two.
Yeah, year two.
Yeah. And while they do have some decent pieces, it's just this team is at least a year away from taking a major step forward.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with them as well. I like the pieces that they're adding. I think, slowly but surely in free agency with expansion teams, especially, you just need to add guys that are going to be complements to the roster that they're putting out consistently. And I think when you bring in guys like Bjorkstrand, a guy who plays a very good two-way game to help mentor some of the young guys like Shane Wright, who's going to be coming in, like Matty Beniers, who looked really good toward the end of last year. So for me, a lot of it depends on the goaltending and a lot of it depends on the ability to score goals. I don't think they're going to have a lot of trouble scoring. I don't think they're going to have a lot of trouble, finding that chemistry, especially within the forward group. But can they keep the puck out of their net? That's my issue. That's why I have them finishing seventh, only ahead of San Jose.
Yeah. The reason I had them finishing behind San Jose is because I like San Jose's goaltending better. That
Right,
was the
that's
main
fair
reason.
enough. And a
Oh.
lot of reason why I took San Jose at eighth is because they're the only team in the NHL at 0-2, so they're already behind the eight ball a little bit. So, just pinpoint them for last since they're already there. But yeah, that's where I have Seattle. I like what they're building, though. Don't get me wrong. I like what they're building.
All right.
Get a super
And
in there. Get a real goaltender in there. We can have a conversation.
yeah, basically. Yeah, and that wraps up the Pacific Division. So let's move on to the Atlantic Division, where this is a pretty interesting division, not gonna lie.
It
So
is.
let's start off with, I mean, the Metro is also pretty interesting, but for different reasons. We'll get to that later. Number one last year in the Atlantic, the Panthers. Granted, they did lose Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar, but they got Matthew freaking Tkachuk. Now, the only question that I really have about this team, how the hell is Bobrovsky going to do? Because you literally never know year in and year out just how good he's going to be. Their defense is actually not bad. Ekblad, Montour, Forsling as pretty much your top three. Radko Gudas, even though he's Radko Gudas, he's a third pair guy who was phenomenal for me in fantasy last year. So he gets an inflated opinion from me. But you still got Barkov. Reinhart has actually looked very good since joining that team. Duclair had a great season last year. Who knows if he can keep that up? Lundell was great as a rookie last year in 65 or like 64 games. They still got a solid forward group. But I do not have them winning the division this year. I have them second.
Yeah, I have Florida taking a little bit of a tumble. I have them finishing third. I think, they lost Uyghur off that roster. Of course, they lose Huberto as well. You can't, of course, you could just say, oh, well, Matthew Kachuk's going to come in and fit in really well in the first line alongside Barkov, and they're going to be amazing and dynamic, and they're going to put up a shit ton of points. But you're replacing him with a guy you replace Jonathan Huberto, Matthew Kachuk, and Huberto was a guy already knew had great chemistry with Barkov and knew he could put up a hell of a lot of points with him. You don't know how Kachuk is necessarily going to mesh with Barkov and if that's going to work. They're two pretty different players. Barkov really doesn't like to get into the confrontation. He's just kind of a silky smooth type of two-way center, and Kachuk is a guy who likes to get under people's skin. I just don't know how it's going to work, and I think they lost some depth on the blue line. I think the head coaching, they really took a back seat. I mean, Paul Maurice now the head coach and replace, Andrew Brunette no longer in that spot after he was a coach of the year candidate, leading them to the top of the Atlantic Division. It's just too many question marks for me for Florida, and that's a shame because early on in the offseason, they looked like one of those teams who was really going to take a big step. But now sitting here, having them taking a little bit of a step back, third in the Atlantic is where I have the Panthers.
Yeah, it's fair. It's a fair point. It's a fair point. And, it's The only reason I had them second is I'll get to that reasoning later in about 2 minutes. So moving on to who finished second in the Atlantic last year, the Maple Leafs, who, spoiler alert, I have them winning the division this year.
Wow, we are on opposite ends of the spectrum. I have Toronto finishing fourth and being the first wild card because I have a team who's going to make a jump up in this Atlantic division. Don't worry, it's not Ottawa. I'm not drinking. Um, but I'm going to have Toronto fourth. I like the team a lot.
Ooh, I think
Just
I
the goaltending. The goaltending is too much of a question mark for me. It just is. Murray and Samsonov could sink the ship in a moment's notice,
oh
and
shit.
they just didn't figure it out. They just didn't figure it out.
Oh shit. I legitimately forgot that was their goalie tandem. I legitimately forgot that was their I am literally okay, I'm changing my pick on the fly. Uh Toronto 3.
Okay.
And the only reason why I'm still picking them third is because they actually still have a pretty damn good team.
They do. But we've seen in the past that goaltending can ruin a pretty damn good roster. And that's kind of where I'm at with them. And Kyle Dubas, again, I've said this on previous podcasts, but if Kyle Dubas thinks that Samsonov and Murray is his best shot to getting out of the first round, send me a picture of the bourbon he's having, please. I'd love to try that. That's just kind of where I'm at, and yeah, I have them finishing fourth, first wild card, and maybe finishing outside of the top three in the division is what they need to kind of get them ready for the postseason and have them go on a little bit of a run.
Yeah, and the real question is how are they going to weather the storm with Tavares out? Can Matthews score 60 again? I have a feeling he's going to get 50 again. I don't know about 60.
Yeah, I don't know about 60 either, but I think he'll have a really good year.
Yeah, and I thought Marner had a little bit of an underrated season last year compared to, you know, all the hype that he got. He kind of got lost in all the hype from players that finished above him, but I still think he had an extremely solid season. And Nylander, still a solid forward. They got some good depth there. I don't know. I'm going to put them third.
Yeah, I still like the Maple Leafs roster. Don't get me wrong. If they had a competent goaltender in net, they would be one or two on this list. But because they don't, and they don't really have a backup that can still a lot of confidence in, they're fourth.
I'm going to take this road. The 1 year that we actually question their goalie tandem, I have a feeling the Leafs of all teams are actually going to put up better, not great numbers, but better numbers than expected and finish higher than a wild card spot.
No shades. Just because me and you said it, Samsonov and Murray are going to win the Jennings. You know it.
Oh, you know it. You know it. All
Yeah.
right. So I got them finishing third. You got them finishing fourth in a wild card. Moving on to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Okay, just because I had to switch, I'm officially putting the Panthers first again, believe it or not. And I'm putting the Maple Leafs third onto the Tampa Bay Lightning, who I am going to put second. I don't see them dropping to a wild card spot. They still have, I mean, they've made the Stanley Cup final 3 years in a row. So why am I going to shoot them down out of a playoff spot? Spoiler alert, I'm not, because I just picked them to win second. Vasilevsky, still a good goalie, very good goalie. I mean, their defensive core is basically still intact for the most part. They still have a killer forward group, even though they lost Palat. I mean, dude, this is just still a solid overall team. It's just a very deep, solid overall team, even with their losses over the offseason.
That's right. And it's crazy that we're sitting here after they lost Andre Palat in free agency of the Devils, right? And saying that they're not going to take that much of a drop off. And I'll follow that up by saying that I think that the Lightning are going to win the division. They're going to win the Atlantic. And I'm very interested to tell you who my number two team is. But I have them winning just because of all the reasons you said. They're the most complete team. They proved that last year. They lost in 6 games to the Avalanche in the Stanley Cup final. But again, I'll go back to what I said about the Blues. 2 teams beat the Avalanche in the playoffs. One was the Blues, one was the Lightning, and that just goes to show you where they are in comparison to the top of the league. I think they're going to win the division, and I think they're going to win it pretty comfortably, to be honest. Okay. I don't think they're going to have a lot of issue.
The only reason I didn't pick them to win the division is because look at how much hockey they've played the last 3 years.
And that's
They've
fair.
they've literally had the shortest amount of time to recoup for 3 off seasons in a row. Literally the shortest amount of time. And we have seen in years past that multiple deep playoff runs by a team can and sometimes does have an effect on a team going into next season, which is why I'm picking Tampa to finish third and no, excuse me, second and not first.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think, here's my thing. I think you're absolutely right in what you're saying. And I think it's definitely a very valid point. But also, we've been hearing this almost every single year, since they won the Stanley Cup, first in 2020. And, after they won their first cup, it was, oh, well, you know what? They're going to have the hangover the next year. I don't know if they're going to be able to pull it off again. Well, guess what? They pulled it off again. And it was like, oh, I don't know if they're going to be able to get back there again. Yeah, they didn't beat Colorado, but you know what? They got back there again. And you know what? I think your point definitely does hold validity, though, in the fact that although they made it to the Stanley Cup final and won 2 Stanley Cups, you also have to take into account that their regular seasons were not as dominant as they probably would have been otherwise if they did not have to play late into June every year. So I see what you're saying. I hear you.
Yeah, well, look what happened when they won 62 games. So
Yeah, no, right on. No,
that
you're right.
to this
You're
day,
right.
best first round ever.
That was
So
great.
moving on to the fourth overall seed from last year, the Boston Bruins. Hot take: I have them missing the playoffs.
Hot take. I have them second in the division.
Really?
Yes, I do.
All right.
I do.
I want to talk about this. So first and foremost, Bergeron and Krejci are back on 1-year deals. Marchand is going to be out for a little bit.
Mhm,
They're literally another year older,
mhm.
and they haven't made. Let's see. They made the Cup final in 2019. Have they won a playoff round since?
I believe they lost to Washington in the first
Oh
round
wait,
of the.
what am I saying? They beat the fucking Leafs.
They did beat the Leafs.
Mike,
That's right.
I mean, geez, get it together, Mike. Get it together. Now, granted, I do really like Swayman in net for them. Uh oh, McAvoy, isn't he hurt too?
McAvoy will not be ready to start the season either. McAvoy and Marchand.
I'm dude, that's I mean, especially for this team, losing those two guys is gonna hurt. Uh
Hey, Shades. There's one player that makes all the difference for me. That's David Krejci. They missed their second line center, and Krejci and Pastrnak now back together. It doesn't force the Bruins to put the perfection line together and hamper some of their depth in lines 2 through 4. I think with Krejci back, it's going to make a huge difference, and they can just tread slightly above water until McAvoy and Marchand get back. And you can put this team fully together. I think they're better than Toronto, and I think they'll be better than Florida. I do. I really, really do. And I really like Swayman too, as well. And they brought in Jim Montgomery, who has not coached in a little bit, of course, went to rehab for alcohol addiction after his first year with the Dallas Stars. Now he's back behind a National Hockey League bench as a head coach. They're going to have some motivating factors this year. And Bruce Cassidy was not a fan favorite in that locker room. There were a lot of young players who were mistreated poorly underneath that head coaching management. And you have guys now who are going to have a little bit of reignited fire under their ass, most notably Jake DeBrusk. That depth builds a little bit. I really do think there is a very, very realistic chance of them finishing 2 or 3 in this division. And I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to say that they finish second behind Tampa and ahead of both Toronto and Florida. I know that's wild, but that's where I'm at with Boston. Krejci makes the difference, Shades. He does. Can't underestimate center coming back after not being with the team he's played with his whole career. I think it's going to make a big difference. But again, I could be way wrong. I could be, but that's just where I'm at.
Oh, you're gonna hate my prediction for the fourth seed then. But I just want to finish up on Boston real quick.
Gotcha.
Losing Marchand and McAvoy, I think, is going to do more damage to this team than people realize. Because, like I said, they're literally yet another year older, and they didn't make too many moves this past offseason to give me confidence in putting them in a playoff spot. I mean, DeBrusk, I mean, Don't get me wrong, I actually like DeBrusque, but there's been some tension there. I mean, Coyle's okay. Hall is, I mean, you don't really know what you're going to get with him either. Foligno, decent. Zaka was actually a pretty good pickup for them. Smith has been all right. And then it's a bunch of, yeah. And then their decor, I mean, Lindholm is good. Grizzlick's okay. Brandon Carlo's all right. I don't know. There's not too much there. And especially, like I said, with the losses of Marchand and McAvoy to start the season, I think that's going to have a ripple effect.
It's fair enough. The basis for my opinion comes from the fact that I don't think Marchand and McAvoy are going to have that big of a difference. And if they can just stay around 500 or a little bit above it, and they're all back together, I think they can have a nice season. But again, we'll see how it shakes out. I just never underestimate Boston. Still ended up with over 100 points last year. So in what was a down year among fan bases, so they had 100 points without David Krejci. What are they going to do with them? Even though they are missing two of their top stars to begin the season, I won't discount that.
Yeah. Also,
I think it's the most interesting division in the league. I think it, could be.
and I was kind of, I thought Cassidy was a good coach for them, so that kind of was a factor into my reasoning. Also,
I thought he had good systems. I just don't know how much he was liked by the locker room, and I think that matters with a winning team. We'll see how that works out for Vegas too.
Yeah.
Right. Again, we'll see.
All right. So you have them finishing second, right?
Yes.
Or first. Okay. You have them finishing second. I have them finishing fifth. Right? Actually, yeah, I have them finishing fifth. Okay, on to the team that finished fifth last year, the Buffalo Sabres. They got some good things going for them. A real thing to look for this season is how is Owen Power going to do in his first full season? One, their goaltending sucks. They have Eric Comrie and Craig Anderson. Don't they have who's in? Okay, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is in the system, but he is not proven. They do have some good pieces on the back end. Dahlin is primed for a big season. Like I said, Owen Power, Yoki Haru is a decent defenseman. Of course I mentioned Owen Power. Their forward group worries me though. Big time. There's just Tage Thompson had a great season last year. Dylan Cousins, young up and coming player, along with Peyton Krebs and Jack Quinn. Those three are unproven though, and then all the veterans. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, the Sabres naming Kyle Oposo their captain today. Again, one of those veterans, like you mentioned. Look, there are a lot of question marks with this team, as with all teams with a lot of young players. Jack Quinn is a question mark. Dylan Cousins is a question mark. Don't get me wrong. I don't really know how they're going to mesh in and do. Peyton Krebs looked good towards the end of last year. How is he going to do in his first full season with the Buffalo Sabres? But here's what I will say. I don't think they're going to be close to a playoff spot, but I think there is going to be significant improvement for the Sabres this year. Think like a 6 to 8 point increase, from where they were last year. I don't really think that's, saying anything too crazy. I think Tage Thompson's going to have a fantastic year. I think he's a budding star. I really do. I think a 75, 80 point season out of Tage Thompson is not out of the realm of possibility. And again, how does Dahlin and Power work together? I think that's going to be, a big thing as well. But I think, Shade, you put it best yourself when you said if you're throwing out Eric Comrie and Craig Anderson out there as your goaltending tandem, you
No bueno.
Can't expect to make the playoffs. So another year rebuilding in Buffalo, but they'll get better though. It'll be better.
No bueno. But they have a lot of young players that are going to be interesting to keep an eye on. And like you said, a slow increase. Buffalo to me is a team that's finally looking like they're headed in the right direction, but the needle is going to be moving up very slowly. And like you said, I think 6 to 8 points, like you said, might be a realistic point increase expectation for them.
Right. And just one more point before we move on from Buffalo. I just need to get off my chest. This is the year, though, for Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen to take over the number one spot. Okay? No excuses. No excuses for a 43-year-old Craig Anderson to be the number one goalie when you've been a top prospect in this system and has been the starting goaltender for the Rochester Americans for the last couple of years now. No excuses. Eric Comrie, Craig Anderson should not be higher in the depth chart than your number one goaltending prospect is for a team like Buffalo. No expectations. You don't have to make the playoffs. Go out there, perform in front of a young defensive core, and just try your best. I think it's Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen's time, and if he is not the starting goaltender, by the winter time, there's serious concerns about that position moving forward for the Sabres. Really.
Yep. All right, and what would your prediction be on where the Sabres finish in the division?
It's tough because, again, I hate to say eighth. I'm going to go seventh. I'll put Montreal eighth. I really don't want to put Montreal eighth, but I don't think Buffalo deserves to be in that last spot either. But I look at some of the other teams, Detroit and Ottawa, for me, they're just on a different level of compete than where Buffalo is right now. So I'm going to put them at a reluctant seventh.
All right. I also have them at seventh. So we're on the same page about
Yeah.
that one. On to the team that arguably had the second best offseason of any team in the league, the Detroit Red Wings. Now, this is a team that is very clearly on the rise. My only question is, do they take that giant leap this year or next year? And in my personal opinion, I think it's next year.
It's next year. I have them finishing sixth.
As do I.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Hey, look, Andrew Kopp, great addition. David Perron, great addition. They did get Sherratt, decent addition in the offseason.
Yep.
But I don't know. Their defense, to me, it's still got some work to do, even though Moritz Seider is pretty much a star already.
Right. There's one piece that's needed to tie this thing all together for the Red Wings. You know what the Red Wings remind me of right now? The Red Wings remind me of the Rangers before Artemi Panarin. Just an up and coming team, just a team that just needed a superstar to just, solidify themselves as a team that's no longer in a rebuild and a team that is ready to win. And I think that needle turning move comes next year in next offseason. So I'm going to have them sixth. And, they would be higher if it wasn't for process of elimination, because I think that the team who I have fifth just had such a good offseason that I would be doing them a disservice if I didn't put them in that spot ahead of Detroit. So.
Yeah, no, like we said, this team is up and coming, and it's only a matter of time before they take a leap forward. Right. Moving on to the team that finished seventh last year, the Ottawa Senators. They traded for Alex DeBrincat. They signed Claude Giroux in free agency. I mean, dude, this team had such a great offseason. It's not even funny.
Yeah, they did. And, again, like I said earlier in the episodes, I have been caught many times on episodes like this for different podcasts or for Pucks and Brews when I'm making predictions by taking a team who had a great offseason and pinpointing them to make a huge leap. I think they are going to make a leap, but not a big one. I have them finishing fifth, fighting for a wild card, but eventually coming up short in the Eastern Conference. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but they are going to be squarely in the hunt for a large part of the year and ahead of Detroit. So
I do have a hot take here. I have the Senators finishing as a wild card team and fourth in this division.
All right.
Because here's the thing. There is always that one team year in and year out where everyone says they are not going to make the playoffs, and then they slip in somehow at the last second. I think Ottawa is that team this year.
Okay.
Because
fair enough. And I could see that happening. I could.
Because look, Norris and Stützle, they're another year older. And look at the top six. They have those two, Tkachuk, DeBrincat, Giroux. Don't forget, you have freaking Alex Formenton, Drake Batherson, Matthew Joseph, Austin Watson and Tyler Mott are very good bottom six forwards. I haven't even mentioned Shane Pinto yet. You got Shabbat on the back end, who, in my opinion, is primed for a very big season. Now, granted, the only drawback I have against this team is after Shabbat, the decor is kind of just meh. I will give you that for them to not make the playoffs, that their defense outside of Shabbat is just meh. But also Talbot is injured, but I think Forsberg can hold the fort down until he gets back.
Yeah, for me, it comes down to experience. And, again, they're a young team with a lot of potential, but I just don't know if that experience, especially on the back end, is there. I mean, I like DeBrincat, I like, Giroux, of course, who was a former captain, definitely, knows how to perform as the guy in high pressure environments, certainly what it will be in Ottawa. Cam Talbot concerns me a little bit. I don't know how motivated he necessarily is, after the situation that happened, with the Wild, in the Marc-Andre Fleury situation. That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I do like Forsberg, though, for the record. I just think that here's my thing. I already have one team out of the Atlantic making the wild card, and that's the Maple Leafs. I just don't see that second wild card team being taken up by another Atlantic Division team. I think it's going to be someone in the Metro, because the Metro is far and away the best division in the East, in my opinion. So,
okay, interesting. So you have them finishing 7th or 6th?
Ottawa fifth.
Excuse me.
I have Ottawa
Sorry.
fifth.
Ottawa 5th, and I have them 4th in a wild card spot. Like I said, I think they're going to be that one team this year that overachieves a little bit and exceeds expectations.
Right.
All right, and on to the Ottawa. No, wait, we just talked about the Senators. on to the team that finished 8th in the Atlantic last year, the Montreal Canadiens. Spoiler alert, I have them finishing 8th again, because I was saying this before last season even started, that them making the Cup final was an anomaly and they were going to miss the playoffs last year. Did I see them falling to literally dead last? No. That was an epic tumble. That was the first time ever that a Stanley Cup finalist ended up finishing last in the league the following year. And I mean, dude, they're in the middle of a rebuild, basically, with how last season went. And don't get me wrong, love Marty St. Louis to death. Love him to death. But, I mean, look at their injured reserve. Carey Price, obviously. Monahan, Drouin, Paul Byron. Their defense is, outside of David Savard and probably Joel Edmondson, is not great, although Matheson is a wild card for having either a very good season or just kind of a disappointing season. They have some great pieces up front in Nick Suzuki, and I really love Josh Anderson. That's just me. Kirby Doc, young up and coming forward, but Juraj Slafkovsky, number 1 pick, and Cole Caulfield.
Yeah, I like that.
I just wanted to say that. But other than that, I mean, Hoffman hasn't been great the last few years. Dvorak has been decent. Armia's okay. I don't know. There's not enough there comparing it to the other teams that I just can't see them finishing above 8th. Maybe next year, but I just can't see it this year.
Yeah, I just can't see it either. And, again, I think it's less about how poor Montreal's roster is constructed and more of an indication on how well the other teams in the Atlantic did. I think if Ottawa or if Detroit didn't make those big moves, to kind of push forward their rebuilding process, I think we could be having a different conversation to where Montreal would be ahead of them at this point in time going into next season. But again, basically through process of elimination, just by looking at the other teams, I'm going to have them at 8th and last in the division. But again, I like Marty St. Louis. I like Cole Caulfield. I'll echo a lot of the sentiments that you said, but I think we also have to realize that this is a team without Carey Price. His career is most likely over. Their goaltending now turns into a major, major question mark. They traded away their best defensive prospect, you could argue, in Alexander Romanov to the Islanders. They're just a very young team with too many question marks. I could see them being good in a few years, but a few years is not now. Yep. And for right now, they'll be in the Connor Bedard sweepstakes.
Yep, and just to touch on the goalie situation, according to Cap Friendly, the two goalies on the roster right now are Jake Allen and Samuel Montembeault. And Caden
That
Primo
tells you all you need to know.
and Caden Primo is currently listed in the minors. So I just can't see it with the moves that Ottawa, Detroit made, and I honestly Buffalo is heading in the right direction. I just can't see it.
Yep, I can't see it either. I'm right with you.
And that wraps up the Atlantic Division. And now, last but not least, the Metropolitan Division, the moment we've all been waiting for. Let's start with the Hurricanes. They finished first in the division last year. I have them second this year.
All right.
I
Very
have them
nice.
second this year. I think you know who I have first, but we'll get to that.
I'm sure we'll get to that in just a moment. Well, for me, I'm going to have Carolina finishing second as well. I'm right with you. I actually think they got better this offseason. But just a couple question marks for me. You know, the back end, I'm not entirely sure if they have enough offense, you know, from the back end. You know, say what you want about Tony DeAngelo and what kind of person he is and what kind of character he is in the locker room. He was their power play quarterback, you know, for the entire year last year. And you're replacing him with Brent Burns, and Brent Burns is still a pretty good offensive defenseman, but he's slow. I just don't know how he's going to adjust on that first power play unit alongside Jacob Slavin. I just don't know. It's one of those things where, you know, Jacob Slavin and Brent Burns as a pair looks good on paper, but how's it going to look once you get onto the ice? And I just don't think it's going to have that magic turnaround that a lot of Canes fans hoping it would. Max Pacioretty is not going to be healthy to start the season. He probably won't be back until the All-Star break, so that goes a lot into my decision. And I don't think Freddie Anderson is as good as the numbers showed he was last year. And I don't think Antti Raanta is as good as the numbers as they showed last year. And I think that's a tandem that could easily go from last year winning the Jennings to this year being just a mediocre tandem in this division. That's kind of where I'm at with them.
I don't know. I disagree with you on that one because here's why. I always pick literally almost every single year I've picked Anderson in fantasy, and for some reason every time I pick him in fantasy, he always has a really good year, and he's playing behind a good team. And Ranta is actually, he proved when he was on the Rangers that he's a very high quality backup goalie. I still think they're a very good tandem. Now, offensively, you said there could be some question marks, but here's a guy you didn't mention. Brett Pesce is an unsung hero of this defensive core. Him and Slavin are carry this defensive core. Burns is going to be good for their power play. I mean, Shea is okay. He's nothing special, but he's not terrible. And then Ethan Bear, young guy. Dahan is a decent third pair defenseman. I think their defense is actually not as bad as people think it is. And look up front. Natchez and Jarvis are two young, skilled forwards who are only going to get better. Aho, I mean, very good. He's going to put up points every year. Svechnikov, he's still 22. He's going to probably score 30 goals again this year. Teravainen has been excellent since getting traded here. They have good bottom six forwards in Fost and Kasha and Martinuk, and they just signed Paul Stastny. So they got some very good veteran experience, aka Jordan Stahl as well, to mesh with the young forwards, which is why, with all that being said, the good defensive core, the good tandem, the good mix of youth and veteran leadership on the forward group is why I have them finishing second.
Yeah, that's definitely fair enough. And I love the young players. I mean, Natchez I like a lot. You know, he had a little bit of a tough playoff, but you know who didn't have a tough playoff? Seth Jarvis. And Seth Jarvis came in as a very young, undersized forward. And there could be an argument that could be made that he was one of the best forwards in that series in the semifinals against the Rangers throughout that entire 7 games. And his absence in game 7, when Jacob Trouba took him out with an elbow to the head, that makes a difference, in my opinion. I like the defensive core, like you said. You know, the goaltending, the only thing that gets me with Carolina is one thing: health. Can Antti Raanta stay healthy for an entire season?
Can Freddie Anderson
stay healthy for an entire season? Freddie didn't play in the playoffs. You know, Antti Raanta got injured, you know, in game 7 against the Rangers. Had to be replaced by Fedor Kochetkov. So I just don't know if they can stay healthy. We know where their ceiling is. They won the Metro last year. They've been a team at the top of this division for a few years running now. But for me, I just don't think they're going to have the ability to stay healthy. I don't think they're going to have the ability to score more than they did last year. And the goaltending, in my opinion, despite winning the Jennings last year, still has something to prove.
Fair
But
enough.
I love Brindamore though. Don't get me wrong, and I love Burns. Helping out that power play, but also looks good on paper. Doesn't always look good on the ice, and I think that's the story with the Carolina Hurricanes this year.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And moving on to the hometown team, the ones that we cheer for, the New York Rangers. I mean, if you didn't figure it out by now, I have them first since I said Carolina was second. I mean, dude, first and foremost, you have Igor Shesterkin, the reigning Vezina winner. You have a top four defense of Keandre Miller, Jacob Trouba, Ryan Lindgren, and Adam Fox, which I fucking love that on paper. You have a solid defensive defenseman who throws the body around in Braden Schneider. And then you probably have Zach Jones on the left side of him, who's going to be almost everyone is going to be a massive upgrade over Patrick Nemeth. But the defense core is set. You have Kreider and Zibanejad on the first line. You signed Trocheck to play on second line center with Panarin. Granted, while there's still question marks a little bit at right wing, the kid line is looking to be intact as of now going into the season, which that in itself, please, 2 thumbs up, sign me up. Fourth line, I mean, there's still a couple question marks in my personal opinion, but overall, this team does need to take a step forward in both shots per game, shots per game and shots against per game. But I think Trocheck is going to help in both of those areas because this is, like we said during the offseason, a player that the Rangers needed to sign who is going to pay dividends. And there's a lot less question marks about this team going into this season that there were going into last season, in my opinion. But with the team constructed the way it is and the goaltender they have, I have them finishing first in the division.
Right. And with that said, there's more pressure on this Rangers team. They're coming off an appearance in the Eastern Conference Final. Making the playoffs now and getting bounced in the first round isn't good enough. Last year, making it to the playoffs and getting bounced in 7 games, would it have been disappointing? Yeah, but is that about what we expect? Yeah, about pretty much. If the Rangers had gotten knocked out in Game 7 by the Penguins, I would certainly be disappointed, but I wouldn't be surprised with the roster that they had entering the season. But yeah, I'm just going to echo a lot of what you said, Shades. I mean, they have a top 10 center in the league in Mika Zibanejad. They have a top 5 defenseman in the league in Adam Fox. You have a top 2 goaltender in the league in Igor Shesterkin. You have a top 10 coach in the league in Gerard Gallant. You have a top 5 winger in the league in Artemi Panarin. I mean, they are just set at every single position. And then you look at their prospects. They have a top 5 wing prospect in Alexis Lafreniere. They have a top 5 defensive prospect in all of hockey in Keandre Miller. They have another top 10 defensive prospect in all of hockey in Braden Schneider. This is a really, really good, complete team, and they are going to win the Metropolitan Division this year. There's one thing holding them back. It's a top-line winger, and I know everyone's going to say, yeah, let's put Alexis Lafreniere up there with Kreider and Zibanejad, and let's call it a day. While I love that, I think the line of Kakko, Hito, and Lafreniere is too good to split up. So we're going to be at a point at the trade deadline, like we were last year. We brought in Vetrano. He was that shot in the arm we needed. So while I think they're going to win the division, I think there's a big trade happening at the trade deadline where they bring in a bona fide top 6 superstar winger to solidify the lineup that they already have. And I think his name is Patrick Kane. But again, I'm just putting that out there. I think the Rangers are one top 6 forward away, but I think that Drury's going to realize that, and he's going to make that move at the deadline. Because Sammy Blais is just not cutting it on the first line. Vitaly Kravtsov, I'm sorry. I know you haven't watched a lot of preseason, Shades, but for the Ranger fans watching, he just doesn't look like a top 6 forward. I mean, you're playing with Artemi freaking Panarin. He's your country mate, and he's playing on the opposite wing, and you can't produce anything. You're playing with a center in Vincent Trocheck who can grind it out like the best of them and help create those opportunities. Kravtsov is not producing. You don't want to break up that kid line. A decision's going to have to be made, And that's where I think the mindset's going to be at the deadline. But as long as Drury does what he has to do and fills out the roster the way he needs to, I think at the end of the day they'll win the Metro. I do.
Yeah, like we said, right wing is still a concern,
It
but
is.
we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If anything happens during the season, definitely upgrades to be had. But yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that this team is going to run away with the division. Okay, maybe not run away, but I think it's clear that they're going to win the division. So moving on to the team that finished third in the Metro last year, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Yep. Once again, they're another year older. I mean, they haven't won a playoff round since 2017. I mean, Jari did have a pretty good season last year. I mean, they have a decent defensive core. I mean, their forward group is interesting because they have guys like Rust, Raquel, Kapanen, Carter. Carter's 37. Kapanen is just okay. Raquel is a shell of himself. Rust is still a good forward. Zucker, I mean, personally, I thought he looked better when he was on Minnesota, but you still have the big three of Crosby, Malkin, Gensel, who are probably going to carry this team to a playoff spot because I have them finishing fourth in the division as a wild card spot because this team just does not miss the fucking playoffs. That's why I have them in a wild card spot.
Shades, every single year I've done this, and I think I've been on podcasts 4, maybe 5 straight years, doing this exact thing. And every single one of those years, ever since I started, I took Pittsburgh to miss the play. And I'm doing it again. I'm just going to keep doing it until I'm right. I have them finishing 5th and right outside the wild card. I think they'll be competitive throughout the year, but I have them 5th. And I think that second wild card in the Eastern Conference is going to go to somebody else in this division that I'll get to in just a moment.
Yeah, like I said, I have them finishing 4th because this is literally, as much as I would love to say that they're going to miss the playoffs, I'm not going to pick them to miss the playoffs unless, 1, they actually miss the playoffs, or 2, something drastic happens, which I don't think that drastic thing has happened yet. So you got them finishing 5th, and I got them finishing 4th in a wild card. Moving on to the team that finished 4th last year, the Washington Capitals. Hot take, I have them missing the playoffs.
Hot take, I have them missing the playoffs and ending up 7th in this division.
Interesting.
There's no Nick Backstrom this year. He's got hip surgery. I don't know when he's coming back. Darcy Kemper, I like, but I just think the loss of your number one center. I know everyone's going to say, oh, Kuznetsov's number one center. No, your number one center when you're fully healthy is Nicholas Backstrom. He's not there. I just don't see it. I think they'll be 7th in this division. I think it'll be close 7th, but I think they're going to be at the bottom. I really do.
I love Kemper too, and I also I like their D-core. I still think it's a solid D-core, even though they only have one player under 30 on it. Ovechkin, his health is actually becoming a question mark for the first time in his career. They have a lot of the same people that they won the cup with. Like you said, Backstrom's out. Wilson's out to start the season, most likely. Or actually, he might be out until January, if I remember seeing something correctly. Hagelin, I think he's out to start the season. That's 3 major losses. And like the Bruins, they're another team older. They haven't, but except Capitals haven't won a playoff round since they won the cup. And I see this the year that they finally start to fall off and go towards the bottom of the league. Not exactly too quick, but I think this is finally the year that we finally see that drop off.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Right. So I still have them 5th, though.
Yeah, I have them 7th. So.
All right. And moving on to the team who I actually have finishing 3rd in the division, who finished 5th last year, the New York Islanders.
Mm-hmm.
So last year, they started off the season, major road trip. Then a whole crap ton of players got COVID. By the time they got everyone back, it was too late. And they only finished, what was it? I mean, well, technically they finished 16 points out of a playoff spot, but they were the COVID equivalent to the Knights last year with all the legitimate injuries.
Yeah, they were pretty heavily injured throughout the entirety of the year, and they started their season on the road for what was it, 8, 9 straight games before they even got a chance to play at UBS Arena.
It might have
Then
been
they
more like
got to UBS,
14.
yeah, and then they lost like their first like 8 games at UBS. So I mean, yeah, I mean, long story short, Shades, I've been finishing third as well. So I'm right with you. I think they're going to make the playoffs, but I think they'll have a very tough first round matchup against the Hurricanes. We'll see how they do.
Yeah, a little bit of a bounce back year for them because they have a majority of the same team that went to the 2 straight Eastern Conference Finals. They just re-signed Barzell, good defensive core. Varlamov has been very good, and yeah, I think they're due for a bounce back year if you want to even call it that.
Yep, definitely.
All right, on to so we both have them finishing third. Okay, on to the team that finished sixth in the division last year, the Blue Jackets. They signed Johnny Gaudreau, got the big ticket free agent during the offseason, but they did end up losing Oliver Bjorkstrand. And I this team is not good enough to make the playoffs, but at the same time, I don't see them bad enough to be in the top of the draft lottery conversation. But it's not that great of a team. I have them finishing seventh.
Yeah, Shades, they finished sixth last year. I'm going to have them finish sixth this year. I mean, they bring in Johnny Gaudreau, which I think is obviously a great addition to play alongside Patrick Laine on that first line. But we spoke about it once the move was made. There's no first line center here.
No.
You know, it's Cole Sillinger, who's good. He's a good prospect. You got Kent Johnson as well. We're good prospects. They haven't proven anything at the NHL level. The defense is very, very young. You know, Adam Boquist is your number one defenseman. And while he's a good prospect, I just don't know if he's the number one defenseman on a playoff team, and the goaltending is a dumpster fire. So I just have them finishing sixth. That's just where I'm at with Columbus.
Hey,
I think they'll get better, but they're not going to make the playoffs.
Same. Don't disrespect Zach Werenski like that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. Hey, look, Line and Voracek and Gaudreau, very good, but the forward group, the depth is just it's not there. It's not there. Which is why. Yeah, Oliver Bjorkstrand also. They lost him.
Ooh, yeah, it's tough. So.
Yeah, no, seventh. On to the team that actually finished seventh last year, who I have finishing sixth this year, the New Jersey Devils. You could make an argument that they were better than their record indicated last year, but they couldn't keep the puck out of their own net, which, yeah, that's pretty much why they finished where they were.
Good here's my
good young players. Team up on the rise, but they're not there yet.
Yeah, this is gonna be my hot take. I have the second wild card spot in the East. I think it's gonna go to New Jersey, and I really like what they've built. Was there a problem keeping the puck out of their own net last year? Yes, but did they have Mackenzie Blackwood almost at all last year? No, they really didn't. And I like the addition of Andre Palat a lot. No rhyme intended. Jack Hughes, I think, is great. Nico Hischier, I think another year of him is going to be fantastic. I think Alexander Holtz, is a prospect waiting in the wings. They're a young team, but I think they're ready to make that jump. I think Dougie Hamilton is still really, really good and gets underrated a little bit by other fans around the NHL. The coaching, Lindy Ruff, say what you want. But I think they're going to make a big step up this year. And this is the year that New Jersey finally solidifies themselves as a team to be reckoned with in the Metro. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
That's a fair point. I see them. They need another year for me. That's just my opinion.
That's fair enough. And Shades, I have a great prediction for our last team here, but I'll let you take it away.
On to the team that finished last in the Metro Division this year, and they're going to finish last in the Metro Division again this year, the Philadelphia Flyers. And I just want to say this. We know they're a terribly constructed team. There's not a lot of good players on that team. I need to see video evidence of Torts and D'Angelo going at each other. I need to see it. And if it doesn't happen, I'm actually going to be quite disappointed, not going to lie.
That makes two of us, Shades. And, I agree with you in the fact that they're going to be eighth in the Metro, but here's my hot take. Place your bets now. The team that's going to finish last in the National Hockey League this year is the Philadelphia Flyers. I think they're going to be worse than the Blackhawks, worse than the Coyotes, worse than the Canadiens. This is pardon my French, a complete and utter fucking dumpster fire of a hockey team. That is what the Philadelphia Flyers are.
And Liam, that is probably a great way to end it because honestly, it's true. And they showed that last year. And really, there's not much else that needs to be said about the Philadelphia Flyers. But just out of curiosity, I'm actually going to look at their cap friendly page to see just how bad it is. Outside of Provorov and maybe Sanheim, the defensive core is shot. Sean Couturier is on injured reserve, as well as Ryan Ellis, but he's already a shell of himself. Carter Hart did not have a good season at all last year. I mean, you got Kevin Hayes, JVR, Cam Atkinson, Travis Konechny, decent forwards. Won't lie. Farabee, young up and coming player. Tippett, I thought he would have been further along with his development at this point in his career. Bobby Brink is a good up and coming forward. Morgan Frost, good young player. But I mean, it's just a complete and utter shit show.
Yeah, Shades, there's pieces there for sure. But I just don't think that the Flyers have established their identity yet. I don't think their identity is a lottery team. I don't think that's how their upper management views themselves. I think they just view last year as an anomaly. We'll turn it around. We'll make the playoffs. We have a brand new coach in John Tortorella. But if you really just, all you have to do is do what you just did. Go to the cap friendly page. Just look at some of the contracts. I mean, you were being pretty kind with how you described a lot of their players and where they're at. I mean, Rasmus Ristolainen, that could be one of the worst fucking contracts in the NHL. I mean, damn, and they gave up a first round pick to get Rasmus Ristolainen. I mean, it just makes absolutely zero sense. Martin Jones was better than Carter Hart was last year, and Martin Jones is gone, and Carter Hart is your starting goaltender. The forward group, you lose Claude Giroux at the trade deadline last year. Just, Kevin Hayes lost his brother Jimmy last offseason. Where is his head at? You can't, kind of put into words what a loss of that magnitude does to a player's confidence. You talk about the defensive core as well. Even Provorov, everyone loves Provorov. Had a bad year last year. Had probably one of the worst years of his career. Travis Sanheim is a guy that was a seventh defenseman for them entering last year. And now suddenly he's in their top four because it's literally that bad. So I could go on for days and days about the Philadelphia Flyers. I like Owen Tippett. I like some of the forward prospects. I like Bobby Brink too. But that's about where the positive thoughts about the Philadelphia Flyers come to an end for me. I think literally if you're a hockey fan listening to this video right now and you are in a betting state, go to DraftKings, go to FanDuel, tell me, comment down below what the odds are for the Flyers to finish last in the league and just put a little bit of dough on it and you just might get a nice return on your investment at the end of the year because this team flat out stinks.
And knowing how the universe works, now that we said this, they're going to finish seventh in the division.
I am not liable for any bet taken about this team. I'm merely just expressing based on the roster. And if you don't believe me, go to Cap Friendly yourself, and then you'll see just what encapsulates the Philadelphia Flyers.
Yeah, no, it's no bueno. No bueno. Just a side note. Bobby Brink literally sounds like somebody that the Minnesota Wild would have drafted. Tell me not.
It does. It does.
Yeah. It does. Not gonna lie, I was kind of hoping that they would draft him during the draft just so I could be like, yeah, that just sounds right.
Yeah. Yeah, Bobby Brink, Minnesota Wild, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, the Flyers are just a shit show that's gonna round out the Metro division. And that is our 2022-2023 preseason division predictions for we'll see if we're right. We're always going to be wrong about something, even if it does come to the playoff teams, which, I mean, there's always going to be at least one. There's always going to be at least one.
Yeah, and that's why I tried to be a little bit bold in some of my predictions, right? Because the NHL is just such a parity league. I mean, I know some of my predictions, might be a little bit crazy and, you might be shaking your head at a few of them. But you know what? We've seen crazier things happen in this league before. I mean, the Blue Jackets swept the Tampa Bay Lightning that won 62 games. Yeah. So, anything can happen. And I'm certainly excited for the season to start up on Tuesday night. I'm sure you're counting the minutes down, aren't you?
Not exactly.
No, not excited.
No, I'm not counting down the minutes. It's just I've been friggin' between fantasy hockey drafts, which I have one tomorrow night, me trying to catch up on stuff over the last like several months, the last couple weeks included, because I had to work the US Open and oh dear Lord, I fell behind even worse. Luckily, I'm pretty much like fully caught up though, but it's taken like a lot of my time and energy. So in the end, let's see, I have 2 teams out, 2 teams in the East. I have 1, 2. Wow, I think I only had 1 team out in the West and 1 in. Yeah, that's how it's looking. So I have 4, 4, 4, 4 across 4 divisions, and I think, I think you had the same thing.
I believe I do have the same. Yep, I have New Jersey and Toronto as my wild cards in the East. And let me just double check just to see who I had in the West real quick. I believe I had Vancouver in one of the spots and Minnesota in the other spot. So,
yeah, that's going to be an interesting season.
It certainly will.
Yeah, I still need to get like fully. I'm not like fully in hockey mode yet.
Neither am I. I'm still in baseball mode myself, but that could come to an end in about 2.5 hours because the Mets like to ruin my life. But anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, so don't take our word for gospel because you might lose a lot of money. This has been Pucks and Brews. I have been your host, Mike Sparacino, joined once again by Liam, the unofficial Chellmaster Gotimer. Liam, thank you again for coming on.
My pleasure for joining you.
And let's go Rangers. That's because we're Ranger fans, so let's go Rangers.
Right on.
Yeah, that's how I'm ending it. Everybody can fuck off who roots for the other teams.
Oh, and by the way, Shades, I just want to put this out there. I know you guys don't do this anymore, but this is the 26th episode of Pucks and Brews. Can we just make it the Jimmy VC episode? Can we just do that? I mean, he's going to be a top 6 forward for the team. So
he was on a PTO during camp this year. So, okay, I'll allow it.
He did play with Panarin and Trocheck last game. So
for anybody that doesn't understand the reference, my old podcast, Backup Blue Shirts, we used to do that every single episode. Pick a random Ranger for per each episode number, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, go Rangers.